I love being a Member of Parliament and I love the opportunities to raise things, sometimes difficult issues. What is austerity really about? It's about reconfiguring our society in the mirror of the wealthy getting wealthier, the poorest getting poorer. Why are 1 million people using food banks? Why are there so many people sleeping on the streets? Why are there so many people begging? Why are we now debating cutting benefits still further, knowing full well the devastating effect that will have on the poorest people? I think we need to say why we're against austerity and what austerity is actually doing to people in this country. It is enriching the very richest. If you want a good health service, if you want a good education service, if you want an effective infrastructure in all parts of the country, not just London and the South East, yeah, sure it costs, but we all benefit as a result of that. There's something deeply unpleasant about a society going forward knowing that in 5 years' time there's going to be more poverty, more homelessness, more destitution. Is that right, or is it necessary? What do we owe to socialism in this country? Every single one of you in this room at some point has benefited from the principles of the National Health Service. Free at the point of use as a human right. There is health inequality within our society because of poverty, because of debt, and there is a longer life expectancy for the richer than the poorer. There are many things to be conquered in health issues, but the very principle of a health service as a right and free at the point of use is surely something that we can all be proud of, and that, my friends, owes its origins to those socialist thinkers in the 19th century that saw the evils of free market capitalism in Victorian Britain. Think about that. Surely there's something good in that. And you could go on about many other things, such as access to education, such as the development of council housing in the 1920s by the Labour Party particularly, but by those that believed that there should be decent housing for all. The party that is heavily represented by the other side here are presiding over an explosion of free market private rented flats, which now make up a third of my constituency, and the people are being socially cleansed by high rents and insufficient benefits and a refusal of government to bring in any form of rent control. Again, better quality housing leads to better education achievements, leads to better health. There are many things that we owe in our welfare state to the whole ideas of socialism. The morals and principles of the Co-op Bank are, in my view, it should be an ethical bank and it shouldn't involve itself in the arms trade, and it doesn't and it didn't, and it shouldn't involve itself in experimentation on animals, and it doesn't and it didn't. It has been mismanaged, obviously, and there are a number of us who are customers, if you like, members of the co-op, who do not want it taken over by hedge funds, but want to raise funds in a different way to protect the principle of a mutual bank. But you're in no position whatsoever, to lecture anyone about mutuals when you were part of a government that destroyed many of the mutuals in this country, such as Northern Rock, Abbey National and others, that are now part of some big banking enterprise. You promoted greed at the expense of an egalitarian society, and that is everything that Thatcher was about, and you in particular were about as a minister in her government. And so I want to bring to you the moral case about socialism. Those people opposite that spoke will have you believe that somehow or other there's something normal and natural in living in a society, whereas Katie says the dog eats dog, the poorest go to hell, and the richest do well. There isn't. There isn't at all. I believe in everybody there is an ounce of socialism. In some people there's a pound. In some people there are many kilos of socialism. Socialism is surely about the kind of society you want to live in. Do you want to live in a society where there is no public provision of any kind of service, there is only private provision, and the only thing to worship is money and getting wealthy at the expense of others? Or do you want to live in a society where there is universal health care, where there is a protection against total destitution and poverty, and every child gets to go to school? Because in many parts of the world they don't. And I want to live in a society that has that kind of collective principle about it. But I also think that we have to have a thought, which hasn't come up very much tonight, about the natural environment in which we live. We live in a free market society to some extent in Britain, to a great extent in the USA, and certainly the domination of the world's multinational companies and banks is very, very powerful indeed. Are they really caring about what happens to the environment? Are they really caring about the level of exploitation of oil and other mineral resources? Are they really caring about the damage they're doing to the environment? I'm making a point that if we want to survive on this planet, we cannot go on exploiting and polluting at the rate we are. We cannot ruin our environment, destroy an ecosystem, and expect to survive. If you live in a free market society, a free market capitalist society will grab every piece of resource it possibly can, and it won't give a damn about the environmental effects of it. A collective principle where we care for everybody does give us that opportunity to protect the natural world and the natural environment. Think about the world you want to live in. Do you want the dog to eat the dog, or do you want us all to care for each other, support each other, and eliminate poverty and injustice? A different world is possible. Thank you. We're apparently more interested in selling weapons to Saudi Arabia than we are in the human rights of Saudi Arabia. That can be multiplied in country after country after country across the world. If we're serious about human rights, we wouldn't provide the government of Bahrain with equipment to kill and injure demonstrators that oppose what it does. There has to be some honesty in the whole of our foreign policy. And if this debate does something, does anything, to make us start to think more seriously about foreign policy rather than racing headlong into spending £100 billion on Trident, developing more weapons and yet more weapons for our armoury, surely that will be something. Yeah. The idea that members were not aware of the misinformation concerning Iraq really doesn't cut much ice. We had the dodgy dossier. I remember arriving in Parliament at 8 o'clock in the morning to read this heroic document. I was the first there at the downstairs table office. I knocked on the door at 1 minute to 8. They wouldn't open it, but at the moment the door opened at 8 o'clock, I put my hand in and grabbed 2 copies. I gave one to Glenn Rangwala, an excellent academic from Cambridge, and the other I kept myself. He went off to one place to read it, I went to my office to read it, and 20 minutes later we phoned each other up and said, "This thing is nonsense. This thing is utter nonsense. Who could possibly believe this stuff?" The House did. I also remember the extraordinary pressure MPs were put under to vote in that debate. I remember a meeting with Tony Blair where a number of us who could reasonably described as Iraq skeptics met Tony Blair in the room at the back there of the chamber, and after we'd been around the track several times with him wishing not to engage in this discussion, others of us wishing to engage, he sort of started looking at his watch, said, "I've got to go now," and I said, "Tony, just one question. Why are we doing this?" He slapped his hand on the table and said, "It's the right thing to do, that's why we're doing it." I said, "That's not an answer." He said, "That's the only one you're going to get." Maybe the disaster of Iraq, the growth of Al-Qaeda, the growth of ISIS, the growth of all those other forces that have been let loose by the disaster of the Iraq war will be a lesson that we've had to learn the very hard way. But if we don't learn it, we will suffer to repeat it again and again and again. I don't want to go to war memorials. I don't want to go to memorial services. I want us to be a real influence for peace, for justice and human rights around the world. You don't achieve that by lying to Parliament. You don't achieve that by invading countries that don't have weapons that you claimed you had. Yeah.